The millionaire's paralyzed son sat alone every day with no friends to play with, until a brave little black girl approached him and did something that changed everything forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The massive iron gates of the Wellington estate hadn't opened for visitors in 3 years. Charles Wellington stood at his bedroom window, watching the empty driveway stretch toward the street like a moat protecting his castle. At 34, he had everything money could buy except the one thing that mattered most: his son's happiness. "Dad, can we go to the park today?" Ethan's voice drifted from the wheelchair behind him, hopeful as always, despite countless disappointments. Charles turned to face his 8-year-old son, his heart breaking for the 1,000th time. Ethan's bright blue eyes sparkled with innocence, his sandy brown hair tousled from sleep. The wheelchair had been his reality since birth, but it had never dimmed the boy's spirit. It was the world outside that had done that. "Maybe tomorrow, buddy," Charles said softly, the same lie he'd told yesterday and the day before. He couldn't bear to watch other children run away when they saw Ethan. Couldn't stomach the stares from parents who whispered behind their hands. 3 years ago, after the last devastating playground incident, Charles had made a decision that haunted him daily. They would stay home, where Ethan was safe from a world that didn't understand. The Wellington mansion had become their fortress. 23 rooms filled with every toy, every book, every educational tool money could buy. Private tutors came and went. Physical therapists arrived on schedule, but no children, never children. Charles had built an empire in tech before he was 30, but success felt hollow when measured against his son's loneliness. Every night he heard Ethan talking to imaginary friends, creating elaborate adventures where he could run and jump and play like other kids. "Dad, look!" Ethan suddenly called out, wheeling himself to the window. "There's a little girl in our yard." Charles rushed to the window, his protective instincts flaring. Through the ornate gates, he could see a small African-American girl, maybe 7 years old, pressing her face against the iron bars. Her clothes were worn but clean, her hair braided with colorful beads that caught the morning sunlight. "How did she get past the security?" Charles muttered, reaching for his phone to call the guards. But something stopped him. The little girl wasn't running away or staring rudely. Instead, she was waving enthusiastically at Ethan, her face lit up with the most genuine smile Charles had seen in years. "She's waving at me, Dad!" Ethan's voice cracked with excitement. "A real kid is waving at me." Charles watched, transfixed, as the little girl placed something small through the gate bars, a dandelion, bright yellow and perfect. She pointed at Ethan, then at the flower, then made an exaggerated happy face that made Ethan giggle for the first time in weeks. "Can we go meet her, please, Dad? She doesn't look scared." Charles's throat tightened. This moment would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. Outside their fortress walls, a 7-year-old girl named Maya Johnson was about to shatter 3 years of careful isolation with nothing more than a flower and a fearless heart. But Charles Wellington had spent too long protecting his son from disappointment to let hope in so easily. Charles's hand trembled as he disabled the security system, each beep echoing like a countdown to the unknown. 3 years of carefully constructed isolation were about to crumble because of a dandelion and his son's desperate longing for friendship. The weight of his decision pressed against his chest like a physical force. "Stay close to me," he whispered to Ethan as they approached the imposing iron gate, his voice barely steady. Maya stood patiently on the other side, her small fingers wrapped around the cold metal bars. Her worn purple sneakers shuffled nervously in the gravel, but her smile never wavered. Up close, Charles could see the careful mending in her denim jacket, the way the sleeves were rolled up to fit her small frame, the pride with which she carried herself despite her obvious poverty. There was something remarkable about this child, a light that seemed to emanate from within. Hi there, Maya called out cheerfully, her voice like wind chimes in the morning breeze. I'm Maya. I live right over there. She pointed toward the modest apartment complex, visible beyond the estate's manicured grounds. That's a really, really cool wheelchair. Does it go super fast? Can you do tricks with it? Charles braced himself for the usual awkwardness, the uncomfortable stares, the whispered questions that always followed. But instead, Ethan's face transformed with a joy so pure it took Charles's breath away. I'm Ethan. Want to see what it can do? It has special electronic controls and everything. Ethan demonstrated the wheelchair's various features with a pride Charles hadn't witnessed in years. His fingers danced over the control panel like a pianist showing off his favorite piece. Maya clapped her hands in genuine delight, her eyes sparkling with fascination. That's the most awesome thing ever. I bet you could totally beat me in a race. You'd probably win against everybody. She paused then, tilting her head with the serious consideration only children possess. Does it hurt? Your legs, I mean? My grandma says I should ask about things instead of guessing. Charles tensed, waiting for the moment that always shattered Ethan's happiness. But his son simply shook his head matter-of-factly. Nope, they just don't work the way other people's do, but I can do tons of other amazing stuff that most kids can't. Like what? Maya's curiosity was so genuine, so free of pity or awkwardness, that something frozen deep in Charles's chest began to thaw. I can build real robots that actually move and talk, and I know absolutely everything about space and planets and black holes, and I can beat any video game ever made. Ethan's enthusiasm bubbled over like champagne. Wow, that's incredible. I can't do any of those things, Maya admitted without shame. But I can climb really, really high up in trees, and I can do perfect cartwheels, and I know all the best hiding spots in the whole neighborhood. Maybe you could teach me about robots. I've always wanted to learn about that stuff. Really? You actually want to learn? Ethan's voice cracked with emotion, hope flooding his features. Of course. That's what friends do, right? They teach each other cool new things. The word friends hung in the air between them like magic dust, transforming everything it touched. Charles watched his son's face glow with a happiness he'd forgotten was possible, a light he'd thought was extinguished forever. Can Maya come inside, Dad? Please, 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 Ethan pleaded, his whole body vibrating with excitement. Charles looked down at this remarkable little girl who saw his son not as a disability or a tragedy, but simply as Ethan, a potential friend with interesting stories to tell. Her brown eyes held wisdom beyond her 7 years, and something in her expression told him she understood exactly what this moment meant. Would you like to come in for lunch, Maya? Charles heard himself asking. Maya's eyes widened like she'd been offered a trip to Disneyland. I should probably ask my grandma first. She's probably wondering where I disappeared to. She pointed toward the apartment complex with obvious love. But I can definitely come back tomorrow if that's okay. As she skipped away, her colorful hair beads catching the sunlight like tiny prisms. Ethan whispered in wonder, Dad, did you see? She didn't stare at me like I was broken. She didn't run away scared. She thinks my wheelchair is cool. Charles pulled his son close, realizing with startling clarity that perhaps he'd been the one who needed protecting all along. Maya returned the next morning with her grandmother's enthusiastic permission and a small cloth bag filled with smooth river stones she'd collected specifically for Ethan. Each stone had been carefully chosen for its unique color or interesting shape, and she presented them like precious treasures. This one looks like a dragon egg, she explained seriously, placing a speckled grey stone in Ethan's palm. And this blue one reminded me of the ocean, even though I've never actually seen the real ocean. Within a week, Maya had become as regular and welcome as sunrise at the Wellington estate. The mansion's halls, which had echoed with emptiness for 3 years, now rang with children's laughter and animated conversations about everything from dinosaurs to rocket ships. "Tell me about how the robot's brain works again," Maya demanded, sprawled comfortably on the soft carpet of the playroom beside Ethan's wheelchair. Her notebook was open, filled with careful drawings and questions written in her neat 7-year-old handwriting. Charles watched from the doorway, marveling at how his son had transformed into an enthusiastic teacher. Ethan explained complex circuitry concepts with animated gestures, his face alive with purpose and pride. Maya listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that made Ethan beam, like he was the smartest person in the world. "So the computer chip is like the robot's brain, and the wires are like its nervous system," Maya confirmed, wanting to make sure she understood. "Exactly! You're really smart, Maya," Ethan exclaimed. "Most grown-ups don't get it that fast." "Maya, where do you go to school?" Charles finally asked during one of their afternoon snack breaks, settling into a nearby armchair with his coffee. "Lincoln Elementary," she replied, then added quietly, her voice losing some of its usual brightness. "But I might have to change schools pretty soon." Why would you have to change?" Ethan asked with immediate concern, his face clouding with worry. Maya shrugged, and for a moment she looked much older than her 7 years. "Grandma's been looking really worried lately, and she keeps making phone calls late at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She says we might have to move somewhere new." Charles filed this troubling information away, sensing deeper problems beneath Maya's cheerful exterior. He'd noticed how carefully Maya ate her snacks, how she always asked to take leftover cookies home for later, how her clothes, while clean and lovingly maintained, were clearly hand-me-downs. "Would you like to see Ethan's telescope tonight?" Charles offered impulsively, wanting to chase away the shadows that had crept into Maya's expression. "We could have a real stargazing party on the roof. I'll order pizza, and we can make hot chocolate with marshmallows." Maya's eyes sparkled like stars themselves. "Really? I've never ever seen stars through a real telescope." "Are they really as beautiful as they look in pictures?" "They're even more beautiful," Ethan promised solemnly. "Wait until you see Saturn's rings." That evening, bundled in soft blankets on the mansion's spacious rooftop deck, Charles pointed out constellations, while the children took turns peering through his expensive telescope. The night air was crisp and clear, perfect for stargazing. "That bright spot right there is Saturn!" Ethan explained excitedly, his voice filled with the joy of sharing something he loved. "Can you see the rings around it?" Maya gasped in pure wonder, her small hands gripping the telescope carefully. "Oh my goodness! It looks like a magical diamond floating in black velvet. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Dad, can we do this every single week?" Ethan asked, turning to Charles with hopeful eyes. Charles nodded, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "Every clear Friday night. That's a promise we can count on." Maya suddenly grew quiet, her joyful expression fading into something more complicated. "I wish I could make promises like that," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Charles asked gently, kneeling down to her level. "Sometimes grown-ups can't keep their promises, even when they really, really want to," Maya said, with a wisdom that pierced straight through Charles's heart. "Not because they're lying, but because sometimes life makes it impossible." As he walked Maya to the gate that night, Charles caught a glimpse of a tired woman waiting in the shadows beyond the streetlight. Maya's grandmother, worry etched in every line of her weathered face. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she clutched a thin jacket against the evening chill. Something was very wrong in Maya's small world, and Charles was beginning to realize that their precious new friendship might be far more fragile than it appeared. 3 weeks into their beautiful friendship, Maya arrived at the estate with red-rimmed eyes and a smile so forced it fooled absolutely no one. Her usual boundless energy was nowhere to be found, replaced by a subdued quietness that set off every alarm bell in Charles's paternal instincts. "What's wrong, Maya?" Ethan asked immediately, his own face creased with concern. The bond between the children had grown so strong that they seemed to sense each other's emotions instinctively. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's totally fine," Maya deflected with artificial brightness, avoiding eye contact. "Want to keep working on our robot project? I brought some new ideas." But her usual enthusiasm was missing. Maya was distracted and clumsy, dropping tools and struggling to focus on Ethan's patient explanations. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to attach a small wire, and she kept glancing toward the window as if expecting bad news to arrive at any moment. Charles pretended to read his business reports while listening intently to their conversation. Something was clearly devastating this remarkable little girl, and his protective instincts, which had expanded to include Maya without his conscious permission, were in full alert mode. "Maya," Ethan said finally, reaching out to gently touch her hand. "My dad told me that friends share their problems, so the heavy feelings don't have to stay stuck inside one person. Maybe if you tell me what's wrong, we can figure out how to fix it together." Maya's carefully maintained composure crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "Grandma got a really scary letter yesterday," she whispered through her tears. "We have to move out of our apartment by the end of this month. That's only 2 weeks away." "Move where?" Ethan's voice was small and frightened because at 8 years old he understood that moving away often meant never seeing each other again. "I don't know yet," Maya said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Maybe we'll go live with my Aunt Carmen in Detroit. Maybe we'll have to go to one of those shelter places where families stay when they don't have anywhere else to go. Grandma keeps crying when she thinks I can't see her." Charles's chest tightened with a pain he hadn't expected. He'd grown genuinely fond of this brave little girl, but more than that, he'd watched his son come alive again through their friendship. The thought of Ethan losing Maya felt like watching someone prepare to amputate a perfectly healthy limb. "Can't your dad help you guys?" Ethan asked with innocent hope. Maya shook her head sadly. "I don't have a dad. He went away before I was even born. It's just been me and Grandma since my mom went to heaven when I was 5. The raw pain in her young voice was devastating. Charles found himself gripping his newspaper so tightly that the pages crumpled audibly. This child had already lost so much, and now she was facing the loss of her home, and possibly her best friend too. "That's not fair," Ethan declared with the righteous indignation that only 8-year-olds can muster. "You just found me. You can't leave now. We're supposed to finish building our robot together." "I don't want to leave," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. "You're my very best friend in the whole world, Ethan. I've never had a best friend before." Charles stepped into the room, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "Maya, what if I talk to your grandmother? Maybe there's something I can do to help your family." Maya looked up at him with desperate hope shining through her tears. "You would really do that for us, even though we're not rich like you?" "Of course I would," Charles said firmly. "Friends help friends, right? That's what you taught us." But even as Charles spoke the words with conviction, he realized he was walking into complicated territory. Money could solve Maya's immediate housing problem, but it might also create new complications. How could he help without damaging the little girl's pride or her grandmother's dignity? How could he ensure that his wealth didn't fundamentally change the pure friendship that had developed between the children? More importantly, he was beginning to understand that Maya had given Ethan something that no amount of money could ever buy: genuine friendship and acceptance, and the thought of losing her terrified him almost as much as it terrified his son. That evening, Charles stood on the doorstep of apartment 2B in the modest riverside housing complex, holding a bottle of wine that had probably cost more than a month's rent here, and feeling his heart pound against his ribs. Through the thin apartment door, he could hear Maya's animated voice, explaining something to her grandmother in rapid musical Spanish. The woman who answered the door was smaller and more delicate than he'd expected, with calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work and Maya's same determined chin. Her greying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her simple dress was spotless despite its obvious age. Her eyes widened in surprise, and what might have been alarm when she recognized him. "Mr. Wellington, is everything okay? Did Maya do something wrong at your house?" The worry in her voice was immediate and genuine. No. Maya's absolutely wonderful. She's been a blessing to our family. I'm Charles, and I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes about something important." 60-year-old Carmen Johnson hesitated for a moment, clearly bewildered by this unexpected visit, then stepped aside to invite him into the tiny but immaculately clean apartment. Every surface had been scrubbed until it gleamed, and family photographs covered the walls like a gallery of love. Maya's colourful drawings were proudly displayed on the refrigerator with magnetic letters that spelled out encouraging words. "Please, sit down," Carmen said graciously, gesturing to a well-worn but comfortable sofa. "Can I offer you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That would be lovely, thank you." Charles accepted the coffee in a chipped but carefully washed mug, noting how Carmen's hands shook slightly as she served him. The apartment was warm and welcoming, filled with the kind of love that money couldn't buy, but he could also see the stress lines around Carmen's eyes and the way she held herself like someone bracing for the next blow. "Maya talks about Ethan constantly," Carmen said, settling into the chair across from him. "She's never had a real friend before, Mr. Wellington. Never. Your son has given her something precious." "Never?" Charles was genuinely surprised, thinking of Maya's natural warmth and charisma. Carmen's expression grew sad and weary. "Maya's mother, Rosa, was my youngest daughter. We moved here from San Antonio after Rosa passed away, hoping for a fresh start in a new place. But Maya's been the only child in this apartment complex and at school." She trailed off diplomatically, but Charles could read between the lines. "What happens at school?" he pressed gently. "Children can be very cruel about differences, Mr. Wellington. Maya's second-hand clothes, our small apartment, the fact that I work multiple jobs and can't afford the things other parents can. She learned early to keep to herself, to not hope too much for friendships that might end in disappointment." Charles's heart ached for both Maya and her grandmother. "Maya mentioned that you might have to move soon." Carmen's shoulders sagged under an invisible weight, and for a moment she looked far older than her 60 years. "The diner where I've worked for the past 2 years closed permanently last week. The owners couldn't afford to keep it open anymore. I have exactly 2 weeks to find another job that pays enough to cover rent, or—" She gestured helplessly around the small apartment that was clearly filled with love but empty of financial security. "What if I offered you a position working for our family?" Charles said, the idea crystallizing as he spoke. "I genuinely need someone to help manage the household, coordinate Ethan's medical and therapy appointments, maybe some light cooking and organizing. The salary would be more than enough to cover your rent and living expenses, with benefits included." Carmen's eyes flashed with unexpected steel, and Charles saw exactly where Maya had inherited her inner strength. "Mr. Wellington, I truly appreciate your generous offer, but I will not accept charity disguised as employment. I have too much pride for that, and I won't teach my granddaughter that we take handouts." "It's not charity," Charles insisted earnestly. "Ethan genuinely needs more structure in his daily routine, and I definitely need help managing his complex schedule of appointments and therapies. Maya needs stability, and you need meaningful work. This would be a real solution that helps everyone involved. Carmen studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of deception or pity. And what happens if Maya and Ethan have a falling out, the way children sometimes do? What happens to my job if their friendship doesn't last? The question hung between them like a challenge, sharp and uncomfortable. Charles realized that Carmen was protecting both their children from potential heartbreak, anticipating problems that might arise from mixing friendship with financial dependence. Her wisdom impressed him, even as it complicated his desire to help. "Then you'd still have a job," Charles said firmly. "Because I'd still need help, and you'd still be good at providing it. Maya and Ethan's friendship would be completely separate from your employment. I give you my word on that." Carmen continued to study him, and Charles found himself hoping desperately that she would say yes, not just for Maya's sake, but because he was beginning to realize how much their family needed this warmth and life that Carmen and Maya brought with them. Carmen started work the following Monday morning, and the transformation in both households was immediate and remarkable. The Wellington mansion felt genuinely alive again, filled with Maya's infectious laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long. Carmen's presence brought a nurturing warmth that Charles hadn't even realized was missing, and Ethan seemed to grow more confident and joyful with each passing day. Carmen proved to be exactly what their household needed: organized without being rigid, caring without being intrusive, and possessed of an intuitive understanding of Ethan's needs that impressed even his longtime physical therapist. She coordinated his appointments with military precision, prepared nutritious meals that he actually enjoyed eating, and somehow managed to keep the massive house running smoothly while making it feel like a real home rather than a showcase. But on Wednesday afternoon, while searching for Maya to tell her that lunch was ready, Charles discovered something that changed his entire understanding of their story. He found Maya in Ethan's private therapy room, sitting confidently in the backup wheelchair that was kept there for equipment maintenance. Her legs were stretched out straight in front of her, and she was maneuvering the chair around the room with careful, practiced motions that spoke of extensive familiarity. Her movements were fluid and natural, lacking the tentative awkwardness of someone trying something completely new. "Maya?" Charles called softly from the doorway, not wanting to startle her. She turned quickly, and guilt flooded her expressive face like sunrise. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wellington. I know I'm not supposed to touch Ethan's medical stuff. I was just remembering something." "It's perfectly okay, sweetheart," Charles said gently, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "But you look like you've done this before, more than once." Maya's lower lip began to tremble, and her dark eyes filled with tears she was trying hard to hold back. "Promise you won't tell Ethan, please. I don't want him to think I was lying to him." Charles knelt down beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "I promise, Maya. But can you tell me what you're remembering?" Maya took a shaky breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to have a wheelchair too. For a really long time, after the car accident that took my mommy away from us, my legs got hurt really, really badly, and all the doctors said I would probably never walk again." Charles felt the air leave his lungs completely. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, recontextualizing everything he'd observed about Maya's natural comfort with Ethan's situation. "But you can walk now," he managed to say. "It took 2 whole years of really hard physical therapy," Maya continued, her words coming faster now as if a dam had burst. "Grandma worked 3 different jobs to pay for all my treatments and special exercises. I remember being so scared that other kids would stare at me and point, that no one would ever want to be my friend because I was different and broken." "Is that why you weren't afraid of Ethan when you first saw him?" Maya nodded vigorously, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I knew exactly how it felt to be the kid that everyone looks at funny. I knew how lonely it gets when people see your wheelchair before they see you. And I wanted Ethan to know that being in a wheelchair doesn't make you less amazing. It makes you special and strong and brave. Charles sank into a nearby chair, completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of this 7-year-old's compassion and wisdom. Maya had befriended his son not out of pity or curiosity, but out of genuine understanding and empathy born from her own difficult experience. She'd given Ethan the one gift that Charles, despite all his wealth and love, couldn't provide: the friendship of someone who truly understood his world from the inside. "Maya," Charles said softly, "does this mean you and Ethan are like secret wheelchair buddies?" Maya's face brightened through her tears, and she giggled, the first genuine laugh she'd had all week. "I guess it kind of does. Do you think that makes our friendship even more special?" "I think," Charles said, pulling her into a gentle hug, "it means you're exactly the friend Ethan needed, and that you found each other for a very important reason." As Maya ran off to find Ethan, her usual energy restored by the relief of sharing her secret, Charles remained in the therapy room, staring at the empty wheelchair. Their story was far more complex and meaningful than he'd initially understood, woven together by threads of shared experience and mutual understanding that went deeper than simple childhood friendship. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a new worry was beginning to form. If Maya had been hiding something this significant, what other secrets might be waiting to surface? And more importantly, what would happen when Ethan learned the truth about his best friend's past? 2 weeks after Maya's revelation in the therapy room, Charles noticed subtle changes in the children's dynamic that made his chest tighten with concern. Ethan had become quieter during their activities, often staring at Maya with a puzzled expression when he thought she wasn't looking. Something was shifting beneath the surface of their friendship, and Charles feared his son was beginning to sense that Maya was keeping something important from him. "Dad, can I ask you something weird?" Ethan said one evening as Charles was tucking him into bed. The mansion felt unusually quiet, with Carmen and Maya having left earlier after dinner. "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Ethan fidgeted with his blanket, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes Maya talks about things, like she knows more about wheelchairs than she lets on. Yesterday she showed me a better way to transfer from my chair to the couch, but when I asked her how she knew that trick, she got all funny and changed the subject." Charles's heart sank. Ethan was too intelligent and observant to miss the inconsistencies in Maya's behavior much longer. "What do you think that means?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice small and worried. "But I'm scared that maybe she's just pretending to like being my friend, like maybe she feels sorry for me and doesn't know how to tell me." The pain in his son's voice was devastating. Charles sat down on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "Ethan, I can promise you with absolute certainty that Maya's friendship is completely real. She genuinely cares about you, not because she feels sorry for you, but because you're an amazing kid who makes her happy." "Then why does it feel like she's hiding something from me?" Ethan asked, tears gathering in his eyes. Charles struggled with the weight of Maya's secret, torn between protecting her privacy and helping his son understand. Sometimes people have experiences in their past that are difficult to talk about, even with their best friends. It doesn't mean they're being dishonest. It just means they're not ready to share everything yet. But I tell Maya everything," Ethan protested. "I told her about how scared I get sometimes, about the nightmares I have about never walking. I thought best friends shared all their secrets." The conversation was interrupted by Charles's phone, buzzing with an urgent text message. Carmen's name appeared on the screen. "Emergency at hospital. Maya asking for Ethan. Can you come?" Charles's blood ran cold. "Ethan, we need to go. Maya's in the hospital and she's asking for you." During the frantic drive through the darkened city streets, Charles's mind raced with terrible possibilities. What could have happened to Maya? How serious was her condition? And how would Ethan handle seeing his best friend in a medical crisis? At the hospital, they found Carmen in the pediatric waiting room, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking uncontrollably. She looked up when they approached, relief flooding her features. "Oh, thank goodness you came," she whispered, reaching out to squeeze Charles's hand. "Maya collapsed at home during dinner. The doctors are running tests, but they think it might be related to her old leg injuries. Sometimes there can be complications years later." Ethan's face went white with shock. "What old leg injuries?" "Maya never told me she was hurt before." Carmen and Charles exchanged a loaded glance, both realizing that Maya's carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. The truth was going to come out tonight, whether Maya was ready or not. "Ethan," Carmen said gently, kneeling down to his level, "there are some things about Maya's past that she hasn't told you yet, important things that might help you understand her better." As if summoned by their conversation, a doctor emerged from the examination rooms, his expression serious but not panicked. "Ms. Johnson, your granddaughter is stable, but we need to discuss her medical history. There are some concerning developments related to her previous spinal trauma." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Spinal trauma?" he whispered, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Maya used to be like me." The hospital room was filled with the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the antiseptic smell that always reminded Charles of Ethan's early years. Maya looked impossibly small in the adult-sized bed. Her dark hair spread across the white pillow like spilled ink. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was steady and strong. "The good news is that this appears to be a temporary setback," Dr. Martinez explained to the gathered family. "Sometimes patients who've recovered from significant spinal injuries can experience episodes where old scar tissue causes inflammation. It's treatable, but Maya will need to use a wheelchair again for several weeks while we manage the symptoms." Ethan had been silent since learning the truth about Maya's past, processing this revelation that recontextualized their entire friendship. Carmen sat beside Maya's bed, holding her granddaughter's hand and whispering soft reassurances in Spanish. "When will she wake up?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Soon," Dr. Martinez assured him. "The sedation is wearing off now. She's been asking for someone named Ethan since she arrived." As if responding to her name being mentioned, Maya's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze immediately found Ethan's wheelchair beside her bed, and a weak smile crossed her face. "Hey, wheelchair buddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse but warm. "Maya," Ethan said, leaning forward in his chair, "why didn't you tell me?" "About your legs, about the accident, about everything?" Maya's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the weight of her secret finally being revealed. "I was scared," she admitted. "I was scared that if you knew I used to be in a wheelchair too, you might think I was only being nice to you because I felt sorry for you. But that's not true, Ethan. I'm your friend because you're the coolest, smartest, funniest person I've ever met." "But we could have talked about it," Ethan protested, his own emotions bubbling to the surface. "We could have shared stories about what it's like. I thought I was the only kid who understood certain things, but you knew all along." "I know, and I'm really sorry," Maya said, reaching out to take his hand. "I wanted to tell you so many times. Every time you talked about feeling different or left out, I wanted to say that I understood completely. But I was afraid that knowing my legs got better might make you feel worse about yours." Charles watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. These two children were navigating complex emotions with more wisdom and grace than many adults possessed. "Maya," Ethan said seriously, "can I ask you something important?" "Anything." "Do you miss it? Walking, I mean. Do you miss being able to run around?" Maya considered the question carefully, her face thoughtful. Sometimes I miss it, she said honestly. But you know what? Some of my very best memories are from when I was in a wheelchair. That's when I learned how strong I really was. That's when I learned that the most important things about a person have nothing to do with their legs. Like what? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Like how kind they are, like how they make their friends laugh, like how they build amazing robots and know everything about space. Maya squeezed his hand. Like how brave they are every single day. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. I hate to interrupt this conversation, but I need to discuss Maya's treatment plan with her family. She'll need to stay overnight for observation, and then we'll need to discuss physical therapy options. Carmen stood up, her face etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened over the past few hours. Doctor, about the cost of treatment. Our insurance situation is complicated, and I'm not sure. Don't worry about that right now, Charles interrupted firmly. Whatever Maya needs, we'll make sure she gets it. Insurance complications can be sorted out later. Carmen's eyes widened in surprise. Mr. Wellington, I can't let you pay for Maya's medical expenses. That's far beyond the scope of my employment. This isn't about employment, Charles said quietly. This is about family, and Maya is family now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and implications that would change all their lives. Charles hadn't planned to say it, but he realized, as the words left his mouth, that they were absolutely true. Somewhere over the past few months, Maya and Carmen had become essential parts of their small family unit. But even as he spoke these words of commitment and love, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that bigger challenges were still ahead. Maya's medical crisis had revealed her secret, but it had also reminded him how fragile their happiness really was. 3 weeks later, Maya was back at the Wellington estate, but everything had changed. She moved through the mansion in a lightweight wheelchair that Charles had purchased, painted in her favorite shade of purple with small silver stars decorating the spokes. Initially, Charles had worried about how she would handle being back in a wheelchair, but Maya had surprised everyone with her resilience and positive attitude. It's like riding a bike, she joked to Ethan on her first day back, except the bike has wheels and doesn't require balance. What Charles hadn't anticipated was how Maya's temporary return to wheelchair use would affect other aspects of their lives. The children had grown even closer, bonding over shared experiences and understanding that ran deeper than he'd imagined possible. But this new dynamic had also attracted attention from the outside world that made Charles increasingly uncomfortable. "There's a reporter at the front gate," Carmen announced one afternoon, her face creased with concern. "She says she wants to do a story about the heartwarming friendship between two wheelchair-bound children. I told her we weren't interested, but she's been waiting out there for over an hour." Charles felt his protective instincts surge. He'd worked hard to keep Ethan's life private, away from the media attention that often surrounded wealthy families. The last thing he wanted was for his son and Maya to become some kind of inspirational poster children for disability awareness. "I'll handle it," Charles said grimly, heading toward the front of the house. But when he reached the security monitor, he could see that the situation was more complicated than a single reporter. There were now 3 news vans parked outside the estate gates, along with several people with cameras and recording equipment. "How did they find out about us?" Ethan asked worriedly, rolling up beside his father to peer at the monitor screen. "I don't know," Charles admitted, but a cold suspicion was forming in his mind. Someone had tipped off the media about their story, and very few people knew the details of Maya and Ethan's friendship. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, Charles answered. "Mr. Wellington, this is Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. I understand you have quite an inspiring story happening at your home. Would you be willing to participate in a segment about how families support children with disabilities? It could really help other families in similar situations." "We're not interested in media attention," Charles said firmly. "My family values our privacy." "I understand your reluctance," the reporter continued smoothly, "but I should mention that we've already spoken with several sources who've provided us with some very compelling details about your son's friendship with a little girl from the Riverside apartment complex. Whether you participate or not, we'll be running the story tonight. Wouldn't you prefer to have some control over how your family is portrayed?" Charles felt a chill run down his spine. This was exactly the kind of media circus he'd spent years trying to avoid. "What sources?" he demanded. "I'm not at liberty to reveal that information, but I can tell you that our sources were very enthusiastic about sharing this heartwarming tale of how a wealthy family opened their home to a less fortunate child. The implication was clear. Someone had painted their story as a charity case, reducing Maya's dignity and the genuine nature of the children's friendship to a feel-good news segment about rich people helping the poor. After hanging up, Charles immediately called Carmen into his office. "Carmen, have you or Maya talked to anyone about our family situation? Anyone at all?" Carmen's face flushed with confusion and hurt. "Of course not, Mr. Wellington. We would never violate your privacy like that. Maya and I both understand how important it is to keep family matters private." "Then how do these reporters know so many details about Maya's background, about her living situation, before you came to work for us?" "I honestly don't know," Carmen said, her voice growing defensive. "But I can promise you that neither Maya nor I said anything to anyone." Charles believed her, which made the situation even more troubling. If Carmen and Maya hadn't spoken to the media, then someone else with access to their story had decided to share it without permission. Someone who knew enough details to make the story compelling, but clearly didn't understand the potential consequences for the children involved. "Dad, what's going to happen?" "What's?" Ethan asked, his face pale with anxiety. "Are people going to come to our house? Are they going to follow Maya around?" Charles pulled his son close, feeling the weight of decisions he was about to have to make. "I don't know, buddy, but I promise I'll figure out how to protect you and Maya from all this attention." As if summoned by their conversation about her, Maya rolled into the office, her expression curious but unworried. "Why does everyone look so serious? And why are there so many cars outside our gate?" Charles realized that within a matter of hours, their private family story was going to become public entertainment, whether they cooperated or not. And somewhere out there, someone who claimed to care about them had betrayed their trust in the worst possible way. The truth came out in the most devastating way possible. Charles was pacing his office trying to decide how to handle the media circus when his assistant forwarded him a link to an online article that had just been published. The headline made his blood run cold. "Millionaire's disabled son finds friendship with poor girl, a tale of two wheelchairs." But it wasn't just the invasive headline that made Charles's hands shake as he read. It was the byline that appeared beneath it. "Exclusive interview with Dr. Robert Harrison, child psychologist and family friend." Dr. Harrison had been Ethan's therapist for 2 years, someone Charles had trusted with his son's most private struggles and fears. Someone who had detailed knowledge of Ethan's emotional journey, his loneliness, his desperate need for friendship. Someone who had recently been treating Maya as well, helping her process her temporary return to wheelchair use. Charles's phone rang immediately. It was Dr. Harrison himself. "Charles, I can explain everything," the doctor said before Charles could even speak. "The interview got completely taken out of context. I never intended for it to be published this way. You gave an interview about my son's private medical and emotional information to a journalist." Charles's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of controlled fury that his business competitors had learned to fear. "It wasn't supposed to be an interview," Dr. Harrison protested. I was at a conference about childhood resilience, and I mentioned Ethan and Maya's friendship as an example of how children can support each other through challenges. A reporter was in the audience, and she approached me afterward, asking for more details. I thought it would be a positive story that could help other families. "You thought wrong," Charles said coldly. "You violated doctor-patient confidentiality, betrayed my family's trust, and turned my son and Maya into a public spectacle without our consent." "Charles, please, let me make this right." Charles hung up and immediately called his lawyer, but the damage was already done. The story was spreading across social media faster than he could track it. Photos of his house appeared online, along with speculation about Ethan's medical condition and Maya's background. Worse, some commenters were suggesting that the whole friendship was staged for publicity, while others were criticizing Charles for using a poor child to make his son feel better about his disability. "Dad?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face confused and hurt. "Carmen just showed me something on her phone. There's an article about me and Maya online. It says I'm disabled and that Maya is poor. It makes it sound like we're some kind of charity project." Charles felt his heart break, seeing the pain in his son's eyes. "Ethan, none of that is true. Your friendship with Maya is real and beautiful, and it has nothing to do with what these strangers are saying online." "But everyone's going to read this," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "Everyone at Maya's school, everyone in town. They're going to think we're weird, or that Maya only pretends to like me because you pay her grandma to work here." Maya rolled into the office at that moment, tears streaming down her face. Carmen was close behind her, looking absolutely devastated. "Mr. Wellington," Carmen said, her voice shaking, "I've been getting phone calls all afternoon. Reporters wanting to interview Maya, asking about our financial situation, wanting to know if you rescued us from poverty. One of them even showed up at Maya's school." "They came to my school," Maya whispered, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Charles had ever seen her. "All the kids were staring at me and asking if I was famous now. My teacher had to call the principal to make the reporter leave." Charles knelt down between both children's wheelchairs, pulling them into a protective embrace. "I am so sorry this happened to both of you. This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from. Can't you make them stop?" Ethan asked desperately. "I'm going to try," Charles promised, "but some damage has already been done. People know about our story now, and that can't be undone." Maya looked up at him with eyes far too wise for her 7 years. "Mr. Wellington, does this mean I can't come here anymore? Does this mean people will always think our friendship is fake?" Charles realized in that moment that Dr. Harrison's betrayal had done more than violate their privacy. It had poisoned the pure, innocent friendship between two children who had found something beautiful in each other. The outside world had intruded on their private sanctuary, bringing with it all the judgment, speculation, and cynicism that Charles had spent 3 years trying to shield his son from. "Maya," Charles said firmly, "your friendship with Ethan is the most real thing in this house. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." But even as he spoke these words of reassurance, Charles knew that everything had changed. Their private family story was now public property, and there would be consequences he couldn't yet foresee. The question was whether their bonds were strong enough to survive the scrutiny of a world that seemed determined to misunderstand everything they'd built together. The next 48 hours felt like living in a fishbowl. News vans remained camped outside the estate gates, and Charles's phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deal offers, and movie rights inquiries. The beautiful private story of two children's friendship had been transformed into a media commodity that everyone wanted a piece of. Maya hadn't come to the house since the story broke. Carmen continued to work, but she was quiet and distracted, clearly struggling with the unwanted attention her granddaughter was receiving. Ethan spent most of his time staring out the window toward the apartments where Maya lived, his face etched with worry and longing. "Dad, I want to go see Maya," Ethan announced on Thursday morning. "I don't care about the reporters. She's my best friend, and she probably thinks I don't want to see her anymore." Charles had been thinking the same thing. "You're right, buddy. Let's go." The drive to Riverside Apartments was surreal. Charles had to navigate around news vans and curious onlookers who had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the inspiring friendship they'd read about online. He felt sick knowing that Maya was trapped in her apartment, afraid to come outside because of the media circus that Dr. Harrison's betrayal had created. Carmen answered the door with obvious relief when she saw them. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. Maya's been heartbroken, thinking that maybe you don't want to be friends anymore now that everyone knows about us." They found Maya curled up on the small sofa, still in her pajamas, despite it being nearly noon. Her purple wheelchair sat nearby, but she seemed to have retreated into herself in a way that reminded Charles painfully of how Ethan had been before Maya entered their lives. "Maya!" Ethan called out as Carmen wheeled him into the living room. "I've been so worried about you." Maya looked up, her face lighting up for the first time in days. "Ethan, I thought maybe you were embarrassed about being my friend now that everyone knows about us." "Are you crazy?" Ethan said, reaching out to take her hand. "You're the best friend I've ever had. I don't care what anyone else thinks about us." "But what if people at school make fun of you because of me?" Maya asked, voicing the fear that had been consuming her. "Then they're stupid," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Anyone who doesn't see how amazing you are isn't worth worrying about." Charles watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. These children possessed a wisdom and loyalty that put most adults to shame, but they shouldn't have to navigate such complex social pressures at their age. "Maya, Ethan," Charles said, settling into a chair across from them. "I need to ask you both something important. All this media attention is probably going to continue for a while. People are going to be watching us, talking about us, maybe even following us around. I can make it all go away, but it would mean some big changes." "What kind of changes?" Ethan asked warily. Charles took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would change their lives forever. "We could move away from here. All of us, you, me, Maya, and Carmen. We could go somewhere completely new where nobody knows our story, where you could just be normal kids having a normal friendship." "Move away," Maya whispered, "like forever." "If that's what it takes to give you both the privacy and normal childhood you deserve," Charles confirmed. "I've been thinking about it constantly. I have enough money to make a fresh start anywhere in the world. We could find a place where you could go to school together, where Carmen could have a new job if she wants, where nobody would stare or ask invasive questions." Carmen looked stunned. "Mr. Wellington, are you seriously offering to uproot your entire life just to protect Maya from media attention?" "I'm offering to do whatever it takes to protect both children," Charles corrected. "Maya and Ethan have something special together, something that shouldn't be tainted by outside interference. If moving away is what preserves that, then it's not even a difficult decision." Maya and Ethan looked at each other, having one of those wordless conversations that close friends can have. Finally, Maya spoke up. "If we moved away together, could we still be best friends? Could we still work on robots and look at stars and race our wheelchairs?" "Of course," Charles assured her. "Nothing about your friendship would change, except that you'd be able to enjoy it in private, the way it was meant to be. And we wouldn't have to worry about reporters following us or people saying mean things online," Ethan asked. "That's the goal." Carmen shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe you would do this for us." "Carmen," Charles said gently, "somewhere along the way you and Maya stopped being just friends and became family. Family protects each other no matter what it costs." As Charles spoke these words, he realized he was offering them something far more valuable than money or privacy. He was offering them belonging, permanence, and the security of knowing they would always have each other. But he was also asking them to leave behind everything familiar and take a leap of faith into an unknown future. The question was whether their bonds were strong enough to withstand such a dramatic change, and whether starting over somewhere new would give them the peaceful life they all desperately needed. 1 week later, Charles stood in his empty office, surrounded by boxes and the echoes of a life he was preparing to leave behind. The moving company would arrive tomorrow to pack up everything except the memories that would travel with them to their new home in Colorado. He'd found the perfect property there, a ranch-style house with wheelchair accessibility, excellent schools, and most importantly, complete anonymity. But as he taped up another box of Ethan's books, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was still unresolved. "Dad?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face troubled. "Can we talk about something important?" "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about Maya's mom," Ethan said, wheeling closer to his father. "Maya told me her mom died in the same car accident that hurt her legs, but she's never told me very much about what her mom was like." Charles paused his packing, sensing this conversation was heading somewhere significant. "Why don't you ask Maya about her?" "I tried, but she gets really sad and changes the subject. Carmen gets sad too. It's like they're both still too hurt to talk about her." Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "Dad, do you think there's a way we could help Maya remember her mom in a happy way instead of just a sad way?" Before Charles could respond, Carmen's voice called from the front hall. "Mr. Wellington, could you come here, please? There's someone at the door who says she has something important for Maya." Charles and Ethan exchanged curious glances and headed toward the front entrance. Standing at their door was an elderly woman Charles didn't recognize, holding a worn cardboard box and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "Mr. Wellington? I'm Rosa's mother, Maya's other grandmother. My name is Isabella Martinez." The woman's voice carried a slight Spanish accent and years of unspoken grief. "I've been trying to find Maya and Carmen for over a year now." Charles felt the air shift around them. Carmen appeared from the kitchen, took one look at the woman on the doorstep, and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Isabella, how did you? We've been looking for you too." The two grandmothers embraced tearfully, and Charles realized he was witnessing a reunion that would change everything once again. Maya, hearing the commotion, rolled quickly from the living room, her face transforming from curiosity to shock to overwhelming joy when she saw the woman holding the box. "Abuela Bella!" Maya cried, launching herself from her wheelchair into her grandmother's arms. "I thought I'd never see you again. We tried to find you after the accident, but nobody knew where you went." Isabella held Maya tightly, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Mi nieta, my beautiful granddaughter, I've been searching for you everywhere. After Rosa died, I was so lost in grief that I moved away without telling anyone where I was going. It was the biggest mistake of my life." Charles watched this emotional reunion with a mixture of joy and growing realization. Maya had another family member who loved her, someone else who could provide the stability and belonging that every child deserved. "Isabella," Carmen said, wiping her eyes, "how did you find us?" "The news story," Isabella admitted, looking somewhat embarrassed. "When I saw Maya's picture online and read about her friendship with this young man," she smiled at Ethan, "I recognized my granddaughter immediately. I've been driving for 3 days to get here." Isabella turned to Charles, her expression earnest and grateful. "Mr. Wellington, I can't thank you enough for taking care of Maya and Carmen. The article said you've given them jobs and a safe place to live. It's more than I ever dared hope for." "Isabella," Charles said gently, "Maya and Carmen have given us far more than we've given them. They've brought joy and love back into our lives when we needed it most." "I brought something for Maya," Isabella said, holding up the cardboard box with reverent care. Things that belonged to her mother that I've been keeping safe. Photo albums, Rosa's jewelry, letters she wrote to Maya before she died. I thought Maya should have them. Maya's eyes widened with wonder and anticipation. With trembling hands, she opened the box and pulled out a leather photo album. As she flipped through the pages, her face glowed with recognition and happiness. "Look, Ethan!" Maya exclaimed, showing him pictures of a young woman who shared Maya's smile and expressive eyes. "This is my mom when she was little, like us. And look, here she is teaching me how to ride a bike before the accident." Ethan studied the photos with genuine interest and care. "She looks really nice, Maya. And look how happy you both look together." Isabella reached into the box again and pulled out a small, handwritten letter with Maya's name on the envelope. "Your mother wrote this for you to read when you got older, Mija. She wanted you to know how much she loved you and how proud she was of your strength." Maya's hands shook as she opened the letter. Charles watched her read it silently, her lips moving slightly as she processed her mother's words. When she finished, she looked up with tears of joy rather than sadness. "She says she knows I'll grow up to be brave and kind, and that I'll find people who love me just as much as she did," Maya said, her voice filled with wonder. "She says she hopes I'll use my experiences to help other kids who are going through hard times." Charles felt a profound shift in his understanding of their entire journey. Maya's friendship with Ethan hadn't been a coincidence. It had been the fulfillment of her mother's deepest hopes for her daughter's future. Rosa had somehow known that Maya's own challenges would equip her to be exactly the friend that another child would need. "Isabella," Charles said, making a decision that surprised even him, "we were planning to move away from here to escape all the media attention. But I wonder, would you like to come with us? Would you like to be part of our family as we start over somewhere new?" Isabella's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Wellington, I couldn't impose on your generosity like that." "It's not generosity," Charles said firmly. "It's family. Maya needs all the people who love her, and we've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about the people who choose to care for each other, no matter what." Carmen reached out to take Isabella's hand. "Please say yes. Maya needs her abuela, and I need my friend. We've all been through too much to be separated again." Maya looked up from her mother's letter with shining eyes. "Abuela Bella, would you really come with us? Would you help me remember more stories about Mom?" "Sí, mi amor," Isabella whispered. "Nothing could keep me away from you again." Charles looked around at this expanded family, Ethan beaming with happiness, Maya glowing with newfound connection to her past, Carmen and Isabella holding hands like old friends, and himself feeling more complete than he had in years. "Well then," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion, "I guess we'd better order a bigger moving truck." As they stood together in the doorway, Charles realized that their story had never really been about wheelchairs or wealth or even friendship. It had been about the profound human need to belong somewhere, to be accepted completely, and to know that love transcends every barrier life can construct. Maya had taught them all that the strongest people aren't those who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up and help others do the same. And in a ranch house in Colorado, surrounded by the people who loved them most, two children would continue building robots, racing wheelchairs, and proving every day that the most beautiful friendships are born not from pity or convenience, but from genuine understanding and unconditional acceptance. The heart of home, Charles finally understood, wasn't a place at all. It was this feeling of belonging they'd created together, and it would travel with them wherever their journey led next.